So we will start.
Good.
First of all, a happy 2025, everyone. I wish you a happy, healthy, and inspiring year. I'm Mohammed Tavakkoli, the inaugural director of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. I welcome you all to today's session of the Zoroastrian Studies Seminar Series featuring Bruce Lincoln, Caroline Haskell, Distinguished Service Professor Emeritus of the History of Religion at the University of Toronto. I am grateful to my colleagues, Professor Enrico Raffaelli and Professor Miguel Toledo for co-convening the series. I also want to express my gratitude to our collaborators, the Federation of Zoroastrian Association of North America, Zoroastrian Society of Ontario, Encyclopaedia Iranica Foundation, and the Roshan Cultural Heritage Institute. At the outset, I'd like to express our collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to live, learn, and teach in their ancestral home. My colleague, Miguel Toledo, the Faizana Professor of Zoroastrian Languages and Literatures, will introduce Professor Lincoln, and my esteemed colleague, Professor Enrico Raffaelli, then will moderate the session.
On the contrary.
Yeah, the other way around.
The other way. So yes, I will introduce Professor Lincoln. Yes. I'm really honored to introduce him. I met Professor Lincoln in person about 10 years ago when I was visiting the University of Chicago. And of course, I've been familiar for many years with his work. So Professor Lincoln is, so before saying what he is, I will just say where he taught. He's been teaching first at the University of Minnesota from 1976 and 94, and then for the last 20 years of his career at the University of Chicago. And he also has an impressive record of visiting scholarships. So he's been a visiting scholar in Sweden at Uppsala University, which is one of the, I would say, holy temples of Iranism. And he's also been a visiting scholar at the University of Siena, which it's an university that I know very well, Novosibirsk University, State University, Copenhagen University, and the Collège de France, where he gave his 4 leçons. When I was still a student, I actually saw the 4 leçons, the 4 lessons at the Collège de France, organized by Professor Kellens. And then he's been here, his description said he's been variously billed as a historian of religions, cultural anthropologist, and Iranologist. He's actually all of the above. He's a rare case of a scholar who merges a very solid knowledge of Iranian languages and, of course, I would say an extremely insightful knowledge of history of religions in general. Among his numerous publications, I can quote, I will just mention the last book on Iranian studies only, meaning focused on Iran. That is the book Religion, Empire, and Torture, published in 2007. But he's also the author of several important, I would say, foundational articles on topics such as Zoroastrian eschatology and ancient Iranian cosmology. So now, this is Professor Lincoln to speak now.
Thank you, Enrico. You're much too generous, and it's my honor to be here with all of you. The paper I'm going to present is titled The Beginning of Evils. It refers to a text in Herodotus 5.97, but read from a Persian perspective. Students of the epic have long noted the way a passing comment in the Iliad traced the suffering, death, destruction of the Trojan War to an unexpected starting point. The passage recounts the death of Phereclos, a soldier of no particular importance, who otherwise goes completely unmentioned in the epic. And I'll cite it in translation. Meriones killed Phereclos, son of the craftsman Harmonides, who knew how to fashion all cunning works with his hands, for Pallas Athena loved him exceedingly. He built Paris's well-balanced ships, the beginning of evils, which produced evil for all Trojans and for himself, since he had no knowledge of the gods' decrees. By designating Paris's ships the beginning of evils, Archae Kakus, the text employs a formulaic phrase and a recurrent narrative construct, whereby something that would normally seem innocent, even trivial, sets in motion a series of events that unfolds over time with consequences that prove momentous. Thus, were it not for Harmonides' skill, these ships would have been less swift and seaworthy, such that Paris could not have abducted Helen. Menelaus, in turn, would not have had to seek her recovery or avenge the breach of guest-host relations. Agamemnon would not have assembled a great coalition to help his brother. The war at Troy would not have been fought, and Phereclos, the master shipwright's son, would not have died in the fighting, along with countless others. The causal chain goes further still, for the text traces Harmonides' skill to the exceptional, and the Greek text labels it echoka, love that Athena bore him, much as the passion between Helen and Paris resulted from Aphrodite's favor. Here, as elsewhere, the epic shows its sense that human affairs are inextricably entangled with and ultimately dependent on what the late Marshall Solins termed metahuman powers, a category that includes not only gods, but demons, spirits, ancestors, and personified abstractions. Casting the Persian wars as comparable in scale and significance to those fought at Troy, Herodotus frequently alluded to scenes from the epic and occasionally made use of its formulaic language. In this spirit, he gestured to the Iliad's account of Harmonides when identifying the ultimate causes of the later conflict. Toward that end, he called attention to the events of 499 BCE, a full decade before Darius's invasion, when Aristagoras of Miletus won Athenian support for the Ionian revolt he was then organizing, after he had failed to secure such help from the Spartans. And I'll quote the passage from Herodotus. Coming before the people, Aristagoras said the same things he had said in Sparta about the rich booty to be won in Asia and how the Persians would be easy to conquer, as they customarily used neither shield nor spear in battle. He also told them that the Milesians were originally colonists from Athens, and it would be fitting for their more powerful brethren to rescue them. There was nothing he did not promise until he swayed them. And the term for swayed that I translate there is anapaise. It seems easier to deceive, diabalein, many people rather than one, since Aristagoras failed to deceive, diabalein again, Cleomenes, the Spartan king, a lone individual. But he accomplished that feat with 30,000 Athenians. Having truly been misled, anapaistentes, the Athenians voted to send 20 ships to aid the Ionians, and they appointed Melanthios commander. These ships were the beginning of evils for Greeks and barbarians. Like Homer, Herodotus identified ships sailing east from Greece to Asia Minor, ships that facilitated a seduction on the one hand and a sneak attack on the other as the beginning of evils, archae kakon. In the event, Athenian troops borne by those 20 ships helped the Ionian rebels sack much of Sardis, the Persian satrapal capital, including the temple of its patron deity, a sacrilege that invited retribution. They failed to take the city's citadel, however, where defenders barricaded themselves until reinforcements arrived, when the tide of battle turned abruptly. As the Ionians suffered heavy losses, the Athenians took to their ships and hurried home, rejecting their erstwhile comrades' pleas for assistance. Now Homer looked beyond Paris's ships to their maker, and beyond Harmonides to the goddess Athena. In similar fashion, Herodotus identified Aristagoras, whose name literally means best speaker in council, Aristos plus agoreu, as the human agent responsible for the Athenian ship's sailing and everything that followed. The verbs used for the address Aristagoras gave hold particular interest, as they provide critical commentary on the Milesians' rhetorical skill and style. Thus, as Christopher Pelling observed, Herodotus employed the verb diabalein so consistently with reference to Aristagoras, twice in this passage, repeatedly elsewhere, that it becomes his very hallmark. What exactly does diabalein mean? Pelling asked, after which he offered these observations, quote, "It is a difficult word. It receives 7 full pages in John Chadwick's Lexicographia Graeca. It is normally translated by something like trick, deceive, impose upon, tauschen, ingannare. Sometimes it does involve deceit, or at least disingenuousness. Sometimes a barefaced twisting of an underlying truth. Sometimes, as when Aristagoras addressed Cleomenes in Sparta, a rather different type of disquieting persuasiveness. So diabalein, in the active or middle voice, is more complex than simply to trick. It basically seems to be, quote, to throw words around. This may even be the force of the dia prefix added to the verb balein, to throw, and to throw words around in such a way as to wrong someone. Now, in addition to diabalein, the verb anapaitein also occurs twice in the passage above. Once in the active voice, apropos of Aristagoras' speech, and there I translated it as swayed. Once in the passive, to describe its effect on the Athenians, where I translated misled, but seduced, swayed, and beguiled would be equally appropriate. While paitein, in the simple, denotes the act of persuading, Herodotus consistently added the prefix ana to suggest either that the persuasion was accomplished by dubious means, bribery, threats, deception, or that those persuaded were led to undertake risky, morally questionable action, rebellion, usurpation, dissemblance, betrayal, sometimes both of the above, as in this case. Now, just as the Iliad presented Athena as the ultimate source of Harmonides' skill and Paris's ships, one so inclined could trace Aristagoras' slippery rhetoric to a metahuman power. For any well-educated Greek would know that it was the trickster god Hermes who first created, quote, lies, seductive words, and a wily character, unquote, which he placed in Pandora's breast when the first woman was created, all part of Zeus's plan for humanity. Thereafter, deceptive speech is among the most effective weapons of the weak, but one that is dangerously effeminate and always morally suspect. Whether Herodotus or his readers made this connection is far from obvious. At best, one might sense a subtextual allusion, not an explicit reference. It's considerably easier to understand that Persians saw metahuman forces behind Aristagoras' beguiling of the Athenians, since they theorized truth and falsehood as such. Not quite divine or demonic beings, although at times these verge on being so construed, but something on the order of transcendent absolutes that find instantiation in the people and events over and through whom they exercise power. From that perspective, truth, Old Persian arta, Avestan asha, is not the result of true speech acts, Rather, it is their source and cause. The same holds true for the lie, Old Persian drauga, Avestan drug, which prompts and benefits from the myriad falsehoods it puts into circulation. And here it is worth noting the Babylonian versions of the Achaemenid inscriptions always translate drauga by pirshatu, lies in the plural, rather than pirshu in the singular. Lies are infinite. Truth is only one and unique. In its pristine unity, truth provided the basis for all moral, socio-political, and cosmic order, while the countless, ever-proliferating forms of the lie were responsible for all divisiveness, confusion, disorder, and conflict. Herodotus wrote knowledgeably about Persian reverence for truth, abhorrence of falsehood, and their view of Greeks as inveterate liars, threats not just to Achaemenid power, but to all that is right and holy. And as Darius made clear in a text he circulated throughout the empire, it was the king's divinely appointed responsibility to preserve truth, establish order, restoring and maintaining it as necessary, suppress the lie, and punish liars, especially those who incited rebellion. And this from Darius's inscription at Bisitun. Proclaims Darius the king, "These are the lands that became rebellious. The lie made them rebellious, so that these men lied to the people. Then the wise Lord put them into my hand. As was my desire, so I did unto them." Proclaims Darius the king, "You who may be king here later, protect yourself vigorously from the lie. The man who is a liar, punish him, so he is well punished, if you would think thus. Let my land be secure." Such principles informed Darius's view of Aristagoras and the Ionian rebels. But Herodotus describes him as having been particularly offended by the Athenians, as he called on what Herodotus describes as Zeus, no doubt Ahura Mazda, for success in taking vengeance, and ordered a retainer to admonish him 3 times every day, "Sire, remember the Athenians." To appreciate why his wrath was so focused on Athens, it's useful to consider certain aspects of Persian religious ideology and some events in the years preceding Aristagoras' visit to Athens. Although Persians condemned all forms of falsehood, they considered breach of a contract, compact, or treaty particularly abhorrent. Such agreements, denoted by the common noun mithra, were regarded as solemn and binding. These could be concluded between friends, business partners, family members, or groups of any size, including nations, and the larger their scale, the weightier were the consequences for any infringement on the agreement. Those who reneged were termed mithra liars, Avestan mitro druj, and they were regarded as among the greatest malefactors, since their mendacity threatened the world's peace, stability, and order. As the Avestan hymn to Mithra puts it, "The Mithra liar scoundrel destroys the whole land. He strikes truthful people as hard as 100 sorcerers. Do not break a Mithra, not one you conclude with a liar, nor one with a truthful co-religionist. A Mithra is surely binding for you both, liar and truthful." Mithra commitments were enforced by the metahuman who embodied their binding power. Sleepless, he has 1,000 ears, 10,000 eyes, and 10,000 omniscient spies who help him watch for even the slightest infringement of a treaty, contract, or compact. Beyond such unfailing vigilance, Mithra is described as a warrior with strength in his arms, bazush ayodjongam, oratayeshtam, a skull crusher, Kamaredo Janem, the strongest of deities, Iogisto Yazatanam, who is best able to overcome resistance, Verithra Jestimo Yazatanam. And he wields a 100-headed mace, the most powerful of martial weapons, Amavastamem Zayinam. When anyone proves false to a solemn agreement, the deity's vengeance falls not just upon the Mithra liar himself, but on the malefactor's people. Again, from the Avestan hymn to Mithra. If someone should betray him, a house lord ruling over a household, or a village lord ruling over a village, or a district lord ruling over a district, or a nation lord ruling over a nation, Mithra, angered at having been treated with enmity, comes forth to smash the house and the village and the district and the nation. Such ideas informed the way Persians understood Athenian participation in the sack of Sardis. For 8 years earlier, at a moment when Athens felt vulnerable to Spartan attack, Cleisthenes, leader of the newly established democracy, sent a delegation to Sardis in quest of Persian support. The response they received was exactly what anyone familiar with Achaemenid practice, and Cleisthenes was surely such, could easily have anticipated. And I'll quote from Herodotus 5.73. When the messengers arrived and conveyed the things they had been authorized to say, Artaphernes, satrap of Sardis, asked them, "What kind of men are you, and what land do you inhabit that you should need to become allies of the Persians?" Having heard the messenger's answer, he summarized things for them. If the Athenians would give earth and water to King Darius, he said, he would conclude an alliance with them. And if they would not give these, he ordered them to depart. The messengers spoke among themselves, deciding on their own to give earth and water, planning for the alliance to be made. Upon returning home, they received heavy blame. Now, this scene has received considerable scholarly attention. Of particular interest is the way Herodotus provided latter-day Athenians multiple ways to deny that their ancestors' attack on Sardis had violated any alliance or treaty. Thus, one could argue that the envoys exceeded their authority, rendering any agreement they reached with Artaphernes, Darius's half-brother, whose name means glory by virtue of truth, Arta Pharna, invalid, having never been ratified by the Athenian assembly. More casuistically, one could observe that in principle, an agreement may have been reached, but the alliance would have taken effect only when earth and water were actually delivered, not simply promised, and there is no evidence this was done. His coyness on these points notwithstanding, Herodotus did detail some important changes that took place between 507, when the emissaries called on Artaphernes, and 499, when Athenian ships helped sack his city. In the intervening years, the Spartan threat had receded. Athens had become more confident and powerful. The tyrant Hippias, who ruled from 527 to 510, whom they expelled when forming the democracy, had taken refuge in Sardis, where he slandered, and again the verb used is diabalein, he slandered Athens to Artaphernes, who then pressed for the tyrant's restoration, an intervention the Athenians found so misguided and so threatening that conflict with the Persians seemed inevitable. Clearly, these developments prompted a dramatic change in Athenian policy, while Persian understanding of their relations remained constant. For as Louis Orland first recognized, what Herodotus described as an alliance, sumachie, Persians would have considered a mithra antara dachyu, a treaty between two nations and peoples. As such, it was a solemn, sacred commitment, irrevocably binding, and enforceable through the metahuman power of Mithra, whose vengeance would fall on the Mithra liars ensuring victory for the injured, treaty-abiding people. Now, from antiquity to the present, all who have considered the question understood that offering earth and water enacted submission to Persian power and incorporation within the Achaemenid Empire. Less clear and hotly debated is why this particular practice played that role and what exactly it signified. Several able scholars have attempted to establish its religio-symbolic significance, but in the absence of direct testimony, the suggestions they have offered tend to be based on comparanda of questionable value. Regrettably, this is true of Orland's appeal to theological constructs of the younger Avesta, Amélie Court's recourse to an episode reported in Faustus of Byzantium's History of Armenia that took place 8 centuries after Darius's reign, if it took place at all. And Michael Munn's focus on Anatolian deities and cultic practice. More secure is our understanding of the gesture's socio-political consequences, as recently summarized by Ila Filippone, who writes, A, the earth and water formula transmitted by Herodotus had homeland, country, in a general sense, as its referential meaning. B, in Herodotus's storytelling, giving earth and water should be intended as giving one's own country. C, by giving earth and water to the king, a permanent ruler-subject relation was established between the giver and the receiver. Some of the obligations were already implicit in the condition of subject, Old Persian bandaka, rendered by doulos, slave in Greek, lasting loyalty and obligations of military and material support in case of necessity. D, ideally, an earth and water-giving people was considered as a part of the great Achaemenid ecumene. Particularly admirable in Filippone's account is the way she distinguishes 3 types of what can be described as earth that figure in the proceedings. First, the soil delivered to the Persian king. Second, the land or country this gift represented. And third, what she calls the great Achaemenid ecumene, into which that land was incorporated. Now, each of these was denoted by a different lexeme in Old Persian, consideration of which can help clarify the way symbolic and material, human and metahuman concerns intersected in these ritualized prestations. Following Filippone, let us begin with zam, which does not appear as an independent lexeme in the limited corpus of Achaemenid inscriptions, but supplies the second element in the toponymic compounds uvarasmia, Avestin chvairi zema, Chorasmia, and uvarasmi, Chorasmian. Derived from Indo-European degom, zam denotes earth in the sense of ground, dirt, soil. Like its cognates, Avestin zam, Sanskrit ksham, Greek kton, Latin humus, Lithuanian zeme, Old Church Slavonic zemelia, and others. It is the most concrete, most humble form of earth at issue. But along with water, Old Persian op, it provides the basis for the sustenance, growth, and vitality of all life, plant, animal, and human. Second is Old Persian dakhyu, which the trilingual inscriptions rendered by Babylonian matu, regularly written as the Sumerogram kur, whose primary sense is territorial. The Chicago Assyrian Dictionary defines it as land, country, as political unit. In contrast, the Elamite versions make use of a loan word whose plural occurrences, da yu ish pe, bear a determinative element, the final pe, that is reserved for animate beings, with the result that it denotes populations and not territories. The consequent ambiguity, plus the complex relations of the Old Persian term to its Indo-Iranian cognates, avestin dakhyu, Sanskrit dasyu, which means enemy in most occurrences, has sparked a certain amount of controversy. Most notably, Pierre Lecoq argued that dakhyu primarily refers to the people, population, and civil society of a given country, while Rudiger Schmidt insisted, quote, das Altpers dakhyu Land und so weiter meint nicht Volk, but rather land. Both positions strike me as overstated, and I would prefer to think that the sense of dakhyu as land extends to a bounded territory, a distinct ethnicity, and a polity whose degree of independence is contingent and renegotiable. Beyond zam, soil, and dakhyu, land plus people, a third term denoted earth as the entirety of the known world. This was bumi, which appears frequently in the Old Persian corpus, most often in the cosmogonic accounts that stand at the head of 23 inscriptions. A great God is the wise Lord, who created this earth, imam bumim, who created that sky, who created mankind, who created happiness for mankind, who made Darius king, one king over many, one commander over many. 3 points are worth making in the present context. First, it appears that water was implicitly understood as part of the earth at the time of its creation, since a Babylonian variant of this passage has the deity creating earth and water. Kiti ibnu u achmesh ibnu, a move that resolves any possible misunderstanding, since the Sumerigram ki, which stands for Babylonian ershetsu, unlike Old Persian bumi, denotes not just the earth in cosmic sense, but also dry land. The addition of achmesh makes clear that water was also present along with the dry land. Second, all the original creations appear in the singular, unity being part of their primordial perfection. Subsequent fragmentation of earth, bumim, and humanity, martiyam, into different lands and peoples, dachyava, the plural of dakhyu, results from the corrosive effects of the lie, in response to which the wise Lord took redressive action, charging the Achaemenid ruler with the task of restoring the world's proper order. Let me quote 2 passages. Proclaims Darius the king, when the wise Lord saw this earth, imam bumim, seething in rebellion, then he bestowed it on me. He made me king. Proclaims Darius the king, when the wise Lord made me king in this earth, ahyahya bumiyah, by the wise Lord's will, I made all good. Third, the identification of Darius as one king over many, Aivam, Parunam, Kshatiyam, sets up an extended homology predicated on the contrast of ideal unity and a deeply flawed, contentious multiplicity, yearning for restoration of the harmonious primordial ideal. Thus, one is to many, as truth is to lies, arta to drauga, as earth is to lands, bumi to dachyava, as one king is to many subjects, aivam kshatiyam parunam. In later inscriptions, Darius adopted king in this earth, kshatya ahyaya bumiya, then king in this great far-reaching earth, kshatya ahyaya bumiya vazurkaya durai api, as the culminating item in his list of royal titles. And on one occasion, he went so far as to name himself king in all the earth, kshatya, kshayatya, haruvakyaya, bumiya, As Clarice Herenschmidt recognized nearly a half-century ago, with these titles, the Achaemenids settled on Bumi as the way to describe the unprecedentedly large, powerful, ambitious, socio-political entity they had constructed. In contrast to our term empire, their usage had a distinctly aspirational entity, a distinctly aspirational aspect, signaling their wish to restore the ideal unity of this earth, Imam Bumim, as the wise Lord created it, toward which end it was necessary to champion truth and overcome the lie. The list of lands and peoples, Dahyava, that have been incorporated into the empire, Bumi, with its novel semantics, provided a measure of the progress they had made toward fulfilling that audacious ambition. At this point, we can begin to perceive how the three different forms of earth related to one another in the request Artafernes and other Achaemenid officials made on behalf of the great king. Thus, giving soil, zam, and water, Ab, represented the decision of a land and people, a Dahyu, to accept incorporation within the Persian Empire, Bumi, helping to restore the unity of this earth, Imam Bumim, consistent with the original intentions and ongoing desire of the wise Lord, Al-Ramazda. After which, any attempt to reverse this decision would represent the breach of a binding commitment, Mithra, under influence of the lie, Drauga. Consider from that perspective, the perspective of a religiously grounded imperial ideology, the ships that helped sack Sardis not only revealed the Athenians to be Mithra liars, it set back the project of world restoration, producing disorder, conflict, unhappiness, and untruth, provoking Mithra's wrath, the wise Lord's sorrow, and making it necessary for the Achaemenid ruler to set things right once more. For the beginning of evils was not just those ships, but, as always, the corrosive metahuman force of the lie. That's about what I have to say on the topic. If there is anything you'd like to discuss, I'd be delighted to do so. Many thanks for your attention.
Thanks a lot.
Now we have time for some questions, some minutes. You can just raise your hand or just write your questions on the chat. Please, Kevin van Bladen.
Professor Lincoln, thanks for your presentation. I've read a lot of your writings with appreciation. I don't think we've ever met. When you started with the verb diabalein in Greek, I was internally making a bet that you would end with the noun diabolos, the devil, the slanderer, and that you would be fishing for an Ahrimanic connection. I wonder if that crossed your mind, or if you think that would be meaningful in any way. I think it might be a stretch, but
it's well worth pursuing. No, it did not cross my mind, and I thank you for the suggestion. It's a fascinating idea, and there's more work to be done there. I don't know enough, on the point at which diabolos enters, Judeo-Christian discourse, but it's worth pursuing, and I'm sure there's a large literature on that will help me do so.
I have a feeling it's in the Septuagint. I haven't checked. It just popped into my head when you started talking about diabolos.
Oh, no, that would be the likely place, but it may be even earlier than that, and whether that is under Achaemenid influence in any way? I'm sure Jewish studies scholars have fiercely debated, but it's worth digging into that literature. Thank you. That's a wonderful suggestion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Dr. Karishma's question, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Lincoln and Professor Tavakoli and Professor Raffaelli and everyone for today's lecture in a very interesting series of lectures always. Professor Lincoln, may I ask you to give us your reference first, and then for you to extrapolate on this idea of Darius and his brother seeking to create this large unified world. The concept Bhumi. But what is your idea in terms of their reasoning for doing so? And what is the reference you utilize for that? Thank you.
Well, the references are from the Old Persian inscriptions, specifically some passages in the inscription at Bisitun, and then later at Naqshi Rustam and a few others, where particularly in the later inscriptions of Darius, some at Pasargada, at Persepolis and particularly at Naqshi Rustam, where king in this earth, Ahyahya Bhumiya, enter the royal titulary as the culminating element. I think that's the crucial piece of evidence in connection with the recurrence of that term in the 23 variants of the cosmogonic account that is at the head of virtually all the Old Persian inscriptions of any length. Clarice Herenschmidt, in just a classic article, was the one who recognized the problem of, how do you name this novel formation, and the fact that, the titulary reflects the choice that Bhumi was considered the most appropriate term to denote the empire itself. Now, there are also passages in Herodotus and other Greek sources that talk about the Persian ambition to extend the empire over the entirety of the earth. And there are a few inferences one can draw from the way in which the list of Dahyava is presented as extending, toward the four corners, and the accounts of the military expeditions against the Ethiopians, the Scythians, and the Greeks represent the attempt to extend the empire to the ends of the earth. Also, the terminology, the Greeks are named in different ways than anyone except the Scythians. The Scythians and the Greeks are both broken down into subcategories of those on the sea and beyond the sea. And I've forgotten, I think it was Robert Rollinger argued, it may have been someone else, I'm missing the reference. This reflects an older worldview where the sea was the border of the earth, and the earth as a whole was bounded by the sea, with novel expansion and greater geographic knowledge, the recognition that there were peoples beyond the sea, enters the Achaemenid, vocabulary, and the ambition to conquer those beyond the sea, the Scythians beyond the sea and the Greeks beyond the sea, reflects the ambition of extending the empire to encompass the entirety of the earth.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Lincoln. Now, in the context of your lecture today about evil, and then you mentioned the concept of Rita, the old version of Asha, have you found any reasoning or reference to indicate that Darius and his allies within the Persian Empire sought to unify these lands to increase the concept of Asha or Rita in actual working, thereby increasing the concept of Mitra, which you also spoke so much about?
Really, the question you're asking is the relation between ideology and practice, which is always slippery. What I'm quite certain of is that at the ideological level, this is what, the Persian ruling class took as their mission. Now, skeptic that I am, I believe all ruling classes are only partially persuaded by their own ideology. And they propagate it when it's useful, and they pretend to believe it. And sometimes they really do believe it, and they take it most seriously when it's most convenient for them. And they find it elastic and negotiable when it proves inconvenient. And so the formulation, truth is the basis of all order, and the king is responsible for the truth, is easily inverted to say, not just the king always speaks truth, but if the king says it, it must be true, which is a very convenient move for any ruler. And given that I think the Bisitun inscription is full of lies designed to disguise the usurpation of power by Darius, I regard him as an extremely skillful manipulator of ideology and rhetoric. And I think at times he believed he was extending truth, and at times he believed he was just conquering people and adding to his wealth and power. And I don't think the evidence permits us access to his inner consciousness at every moment to tell when that slip begins to emerge. Is that an adequate answer to the question you put? It's a very important and subtle question.
I think you've answered it as best as you can and pointed us out to the limit of the evidence available, for which I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have another question by Ryan King, please.
Hello. My camera and screen are in two different places, so apologies if I'm looking somewhere random. Thank you very much, Professor Lincoln, for the very interesting talk. I have sort of a philological question to ask, which is about Mithra as a contract or treaty, however we want to render it. Does this appear in the Old Persian corpus, or is this all coming from the Avestan evidence? Because I don't remember off the top of my head.
Sure, no. I quoted the Avestan evidence because that's where we have disquisitions about the nature of Mithra. Mithra appears as the proper name of the deity in inscriptions of Artaxerxes II, and is involved in onomastics to an enormous extent. There must be, I don't know, 40 or 50 Old Persian names in which Mithra appears, but none of these are discursive, and so, we appeal to, the Avesta for our best description of what this deity represented and what the common noun behind the deity, denoted.
Yeah, I see. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Thank you very much. We have another question by Professor Daryai.
Yeah, I have also a question, but I don't know how to raise my hand. Thank you.
Then very quickly, Professor Daryai, and after, because we are running out of time, sorry.
Sure.
Hello. Thank you very much, Professor Lincoln, for your talk. I wanted to ask you on the issue of earth and water. What's of course interesting to me is that while the Old Persian inscriptions specifically don't mention earth and water together, Bumi and Api, when we get to the Middle Persian text, we begin to see them next to each other. But in terms of Bumi, you have the other Persian word, Khako, and it appears about 4 times. Twice as how to make a brick or sort of, but the other 2, it refers to something, as we were talking about. And then in Persian, all the way from the Shahnameh to modern Persian poetry, Bumi again appears. Boom, Khako, boom, for land and earth, and so on. What I'm interested in is, I think even before the discussions of Amelie Court and others, it was, I think, Momigliano in the 1940s who has this article in regards to earth and water, that he suggests that the idea is actually Hellenistic in origin, the idea of to rule over land and sea. And somehow via Hellenism, it actually enters this Persian discourse. But of course, the idea is, of course, Darius already is asking for land and sea. I wanted to get your sense of what you think.
I'm not familiar with the Momigliano article, and if you could send me the reference, I
can.
I would love to see that. Anything he wrote is worth reading. I think, I don't think you have to go to Middle Persian. I think already in the Avestan versions of the cosmogony, you have earth and water and plants. Water and plants don't appear in the Old Persian version because I think they are assumed implicit already part of Bhumi. And in the Avesta, you get 6 rather than 4 original creations, and it's precisely earth and plants that are added. I also think this new interpretation of the Babylonian variant, and there are some real textual intricacies involved here, but I find it persuasive that it does explicitly specify earth and water, where the Old Persian has just bhumi. And I take that as significant because the Babylonian for earth is dry soil. It is much more limited than bhumi is, and therefore the translators had to specify, yes, water is part of this. And that for me concluded what had been a conundrum prior to my seeing that new.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have just time for our last question. So please, Professor Burshariati.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Miguel. Professor Lincoln, thank you so much for that enlightening talk. And I don't know whether you know me or not, but I work on Mitra quite a bit. So I was wondering, what is the Hittite context of all of this?
Oh dear, I don't control Hittite, and so it's not something I've explored deeply. But there's an article from Michael Mund that grows out of a book he wrote on Anatolian deities, in which he shows that there is considerable interest in the combination of earth and water, specifically around the female deities in Anatolian pantheon. I'm persuaded by his presentation that there's a commonality here, but he wants to go further and see it as causal, and that the Anatolian ideas were influential on the Achaemenids. And I see very, very little evidence to support that. I think he's clutching at straws and trying to make connections for which there's very little evidence.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. I didn't know about that. I'll pursue it. Thank you.
I can send you the reference if you like. Drop me an email and I will, give you, the relevant citations.
By all means, I'll do that. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Thank you very much. With this, please let me thank again Professor Lincoln for his wonderful lecture. And of course, remind you that we will have some more lectures on our segment.
I also want to thank Professor Lincoln for this amazing presentation. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us and turning this to a memorable session. Have a great day.